I'm Larry Menti. Welcome to Another Thing. Matthew Shepard, a victim because he was gay. Dylan Roof, a murderer because he was racist. They are tragically familiar names known to us because of their connection to hate crimes. And now in Chicago, there was the January beating of a mentally disabled white man by 4 African Americans who streamed it live while threatening and taunting him. They are now charged with hate crimes. Our Kolodziej takes a look at some of the more notorious hate cases, including some in our own backyard. Ellen.
Thank you, Larry. Right now, 45 states have a hate crime law on the books, and a lot of them add extra penalties when a crime is motivated by race, religion, or sexual orientation. But a lot of cities are strengthening their own individual laws. For example, here in Philadelphia, the law changed after a vicious assault on a gay couple here in Center City. This video showing a special needs white man being tortured by 4 African Americans, spewing anti-white slurs, has reignited a debate about hate crimes.
There was never a question whether or not this incident qualified to be investigated as a hate crime. But as I said yesterday, we need to base the investigation based on facts and not emotion.
2 women and 2 men have been charged with a slew of crimes, including a hate crime after that beating. Illinois law says hate can be considered an aggravating factor and could mean more jail time. In Lakewood, New Jersey, a black man was charged with bias intimidation after he allegedly shouted racial slurs at Jewish men during an assault. And Philadelphia went further than state law, adding sexual orientation to the list of hate crimes after Catherine Knott was convicted in 2015 for her role in the attack of 2 gay men. 2 of the most prominent hate crimes both happened in 1998. In Texas, white supremacists murdered a black man, James Byrd Jr., then dragged his body with a pickup truck for 3 miles. In Wyoming, college student Matthew Shepard was tortured and murdered because he was gay. In 2009, Congress passed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, making it a federal crime to cause injury to any victim because of race, color, religion, or national origin.
These laws are necessary. It's a sad fact about life in 21st century America, but such is the conditions of our history at the moment, and vulnerable communities need to be able to protect themselves legally.
Jacob Bender is the executive director of CARE Philadelphia, which stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations. He sees Muslims and other minorities discriminated against every day, and he knows hate crime laws are needed. But he and his staff believe something would help even more. It's called restorative justice,
which helps to take the victim and the offender and actually create a dialogue between the 2 groups so that each party can get a better understanding of where they're coming from. And it's been statistically proven to not only reduce the likelihood of the offender committing the crime again, but it's also been proven to be very effective for the victim to feel like justice has been done.
The real answer to hate crimes in America is not piling on additional years of incarceration within a corrupt and broken down and racist prison system, but greater education and media and public relations.
This past summer, Louisiana was the first state to add police officers to the list of hate crime victims. The law is called Blue Lives Matter, and several other states, including New Jersey, are considering similar legislation. Reporting for Another Thing, I'm Kolodziej.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Joining me now for a deeper dive into hate crimes, Heidi Tannenbaum Newman is an assistant prosecutor in the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office and deals specifically with hate crimes. I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
What is a hate crime?
In New Jersey, we call it a bias crime. It's a crime where the victim is targeted because of their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, their sexual identity, their ethnicity, their national origin, and the crime is a higher penalty if someone is targeted because of that class or that perceived class.
It's a higher penalty than the crime that was committed.
It is an enhanced penalty. So
does another crime have to be committed for there to be make it a hate crime?
Yes.
And so this is in addition to the crime committed?
It enhances it. So instead of it just being, say, harassment, If someone is threatened and intimidated, they're not going to be charged with harassment. They're going to be charged as bias, intimidation in the 4th degree, which is a charge higher.
So no one is ever specifically and solely charged with a hate crime. Something
No.
else has to happen.
Right. The bias intimidation is part and parcel of another crime. The motive, the intent to commit the crime is because the offender is targeting that particular victim in a particular class.
If you assault someone and they believe it's a hate crime and you charge them with a hate crime or a bias crime, they could be found guilty of the assault or murder or whatever the crime is and not be found guilty of bias or hate.
Exactly.
But it can't be the other way around.
Right. You need to have another crime part of the bias.
But you have to be found guilty of that crime as well?
Well, the bias intimidation is a part and parcel, like an attempted crime. The language of the bias is part of the other crime.
And that's what I'm getting at.
So you can have a count of bias intimidation for assault and then just an assault charge.
Right. So it can't be a crime in and of itself.
No, you can't.
Hate or bias can't be a crime in and of it.
It usually
itself.
something had to occur with that hate or the bias, yes.
So it is unique in all charges, in that it's not a crime in and of itself.
Right. The bias intimidation is related to another crime.
Do you think it's
yes.
important to have this?
Yes.
Why?
Especially in our county and in our state, we have such a diverse group of people of different backgrounds, and it is to give enhanced penalties of why people are being targeted. It's to protect the people to feel safe in the streets, feel safe in their homes, that they're not going to be targeted because of their religion or their sexual orientation or their ethnicity, and it's to punish people when they do target people because of those reasons.
Because sometimes, so is the initial charge of assault or is the initial charge of murder not good enough in those cases?
The issue is, say someone is attacked and robbed on the street, and their watch is taken from them. That is a robbery, and that person will get over the fact that their watch was taken. But say someone's walking home, they're a minority, they're walking home, and they're attacked just because they're of the color of their skin. That's different. That affects that victim much deeper than someone who had their watch stolen. That affects the community at large that now it's not safe to walk on the street because of the color of your skin or your ethnicity and so forth. So there are enhanced penalties to protect the community who are those particular class of people.
Do you believe it's also preventive to have hate crimes, in that when it gets out that you can be charged
Absolutely.
as a hate crime? It stops others who may have that proclivity?
Well, that's what laws are on the books for. They're for deterrence, specific deterrence to that individual, and the community deterrence, so the community knows this is not going to be tolerated, this is not going to be accepted.
Many times someone is charged with a hate crime because of what they say when the crime is being committed. Is that the only thing that needs to be proved, or do you need to get deeper than that to prove that actually hate was what pushed them to this point?
It's more than that. The words are part of the overall acts of that individual to prove the intent. Like any other crime, you have to prove, most crimes you have to prove their intent and their motive. So in order to prove a bias crime, you have the words, their actions, the comments they may have said to the police. The totality of that would show that the only reason that that victim was targeted is because that defendant had a hatred toward that particular victim's class or sexual orientation or religion.
Let's talk about the most recent case. It's not in Monmouth County, it was in Chicago.
I'm in Ocean County.
Yeah, in Ocean County, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Out of Chicago, with the tape of 2 black men, 2 black women torturing a white disabled man. And during it, they said they knew that he had mental illness. During it, they said F white people, and they also said F Donald Trump. Is that enough from that tape to prosecute for a hate crime? I know they were charged with it. They were charged with 2 hate crimes, one against a disabled person and one against for racial reasons. Is that enough in the tape?
I haven't seen the whole tape, but what we would do in our office is you'd play the tape, you'd obviously see if they make any admissions. You have to see, why did they pick him to be, why did they kidnap him? Why did they assault him? Was it because he's disabled? Because that's also another protected class under bias intimidation. Was it because he was white? If you can show that that is why they targeted him, yes, you could have valid bias crime charges.
So the words themselves being used on that tape
is proof toward their motive.
It's proof towards their motive, but it's not enough in and of itself.
It could be, but I'm sure that the prosecutors handling that have interviews. I'm sure they're interviewing the victim because I'm sure there were circumstances of how he was abducted that he's going to tell them what they said. There's going to be more than just the words that were in that video.
Because I would imagine a defense of that is to say just because they say this words doesn't mean it's a hate crime.
Right.
But, and is it possible to keep that type of evidence out of jury just because it is so incendiary?
I'm sure the motion they're going to make is that that should be admissible because it proves the elements of the crime. So I'm sure the prosecutor is going to get that tape in.
How prevalent are these crimes?
It varies. I think there's been a rise. I know that the Southern Poverty Law Center down south does look across the country of hate crimes by hate groups as well as individuals, and there has been a rise in it.
Does the political climate cause that?
I think it's more of the social economic climate. When there's a recession or there's economic issues, unemployment, people tend to blame illegal immigrants or other groups, and that I think that kind of feeds the flames for causing that.
I know there is a political debate about hate crimes, and it was fascinating to hear from a prosecutor that it's very useful. So I appreciate you being here. I thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Heidi Tannenbaum Newman, an assistant prosecutor in the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office. A book that helps Rutgers make peace with some of its distant past. That's what's coming up next on Another Thing. Stay with us.